So thank you for your patience, everyone. So good afternoon to all of you, and welcome back after your lunch. We know it was a late lunch, but hopefully it just made it better since you were hungry. We have a few announcements before we start with our next processes. The first one is that our elder, Gwen Point, requested that a message be read for today about the cedar tree. The message says, "The cedar tree is sacred. There was once a generous man that looked after his people throughout his life. When that man died, the Creator said, 'Where he is buried will grow a cedar tree. The wood will be for your longhouses and canoes. The roots will be for your baskets. The bark will be for your clothing. And the cedar boughs for spiritual cleansing.'" And this is a story from the solo. So today, as part of one of the local traditions, requested by our knowledge keeper, Gwendolyn Point, there will be cedar boughs placed over the main doors to our side and in back of you. The cedar boughs will naturally take away the negative energy and allow for positive conversation and continued decorum as we have. So I would like to recognize and thank Dr. Gwendolyn Point, our knowledge keeper, for her message and for this gesture of purification. After this, we were informed a few moments ago that Emergency Resolution 2 has been officially withdrawn by the mover and seconder. So I repeat, Emergency Resolution number 2 has officially been withdrawn by the mover and seconder. To speak about the process for the rest of the afternoon, we will be looking towards Emergency Resolution 1. We have the revised version, which was distributed to you before lunch, as well as we now have the translated version in French, which is available at a distribution table. There are copies for our French-speaking chiefs. As well as to that, since Emergency Resolution 2 was withdrawn, we do not need to go over that matter. We will then follow on to the policing plenary with Regional Chief Ghislain Picard. We will then go on to the different draft resolutions that we have on our agenda and follow up with plenary on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We'll see where we can get with that during the day as we evolve, seeing how long the discussions take and how much time we give to each. And as well as you guys know, as the regular process, the Resolutions Committee is looking towards possibly creating omnibus bills based on, or omnibus packages, I should say, based on the different subjects. That is a process being taken care of by the Resolutions Committee. So for our sake, we will wait for further clarification from their team. Quick comment too, also someone brought glasses earlier to the front stage. Just to tell you that there is a lost and found in room 105, so if ever you do lose your glasses, your coat, your bag, or whatever, room 105 is where you can go. Okay. To try and ensure that our finish time also is before the gala. The gala is at 6 p.m. at the Marriott Hotel. So our host nation here and our host region has organized this gala for us. So we will work to ensure that the schedule, again, reflects this in respect of our hosts. We will again see with the Resolutions Committee. I'll look towards distribution. If the team at distribution, Dennis? Salut moi. Dennis. For those of you who are slowly coming in too, with our chiefs and our proxies here, registered representatives, just to inform you that Emergency Resolution number 2 has officially been withdrawn. So we will be proceeding with Emergency Resolution 1 with the revised version, and then going on towards different plenaries and resolutions. I'll be waiting for an update from my co-chair. So we can slowly get started. And I just want to inform the members that are on Zoom with us that you have been shared the resolution versions in French and in English within the chat box. So the staff is confirming that, as well as revised resolution, which was given to you, which is our next item on the agenda. So for revised emergency draft resolution number 1, 2022, titled Investigation and Audit of the AFN's Financial and Management Practices, moved by Chief Wendy Jocko. I see Chief Jocko in the room, and seconded by Chief Lance Heyman, who I see beside Chief Jocko. Thank you for putting them up on the screen. We will be going through the entire whereas and therefore be resolved, seeing as how this is an emergency resolution. We just want to read them into the record. So whereas A, the Assembly of First Nations National Chief Roseanne Archibald was duly elected on July 8, 2021 by the Chiefs in Assembly, in parentheses 205 to 144, close parentheses, after the remaining candidates conceded defeat. B, on that day, the National Chief Roseanne Archibald made history as the first female National Chief since the creation of the AFN National Indian Brotherhood. C, a major plank in the election campaign of the National Chief was to eradicate all forms of corruption, cronyism, and the toxic working environment that plagued the AFN then, and apparently continues to negatively affect the AFN now, through accountability and transparency measures. D, not sure why they're marked out. D, the AFN Executive Committee does not have the jurisdiction under the AFN Charter to suspend the National Chief. E, this recent draconian action by the AFN executive is not being perceived at all well outside the organization, in fact being characterized in the press as a banana republic, political move, and has caused irreparable reputational harm to the AFN both publicly and within the member communities. And the final whereas, F, it is obvious, no matter which side of the issue one happens to be on, that there's a serious problem that exists within the AFN that is causing serious reputational harm to the organization created to reflect the voices of the Chiefs in Assembly. Moving on to the therefore be it resolved that the Chiefs in Assembly, 1, and this is the revised version, 1, that there should be an immediate end to this unsubstantiated and unlawful suspension of Roseanne Archibald, and that her Assembly of First Nations email, phone, and other benefits be reactivated immediately. 2, direct that the AFN National Chief and the Executive Committee come together and begin a process of reconciliation between these offices, guided by our traditional customary ways to heal the relationships and ensure the process is informed by the AFN councils. 3, direct that the National Chief and the Executive Committee actively participate in the human resources investigation to respond to the staff complaints in good faith. The seconder that the version that was given to us might not be the most up-to-date, so I'd look towards my resolution committee to see if there is a more up-to-date version. We'll have to go through the process again, seeing as how. So for draft resolution, emergency draft resolution, the revised edition 01-2022, investigation and audit of the AFN's financial management practices, moved by Chief Wendy Jocko and seconded by Chief Lance Heyman, who are both present. Whereas A, Assembly of First Nations National Chief Roseanne Archibald was duly elected on July 8, 2021 by the Chiefs in Assembly, in parentheses 205 to 144, close parentheses, after the remaining candidates conceded defeat. B, on that day, the National Chief Roseanne Archibald made history as the first female national chief since the creation of the AFN National Indian Brotherhood, in parentheses NIB. C, a major plank in the election campaign of the national chief was to eradicate all forms of corruption, cronyism, and the toxic working environment that plagued the AFN then and apparently continues to negatively affect the AFN now, through accountability and transparency measures. D, the AFN Executive Committee suspended the national chief on June 17, 2022. E, Chiefs in Assembly affirmed on July 5, 2022, that National Chief Roseanne Archibald is no longer suspended from her role and that her AFN email, phone, and other benefits be reactivated immediately. F, the Chiefs in Assembly seek to establish a path forward built on reconciliation, accountability, and mutual respect. G, there is a serious problem that exists within the AFN that is causing serious reputational harm to the organization created to reflect the voices of the Chiefs in Assembly. Therefore, be it resolved that the Chiefs in Assembly, 1, direct the National Chief and the Executive Committee to come together and begin a process of reconciliation guided by our traditional customary ways and informed by the National Assembly of First Nations, AFN, in parentheses, councils, to heal these relationships. 2, direct the National Chief and the Executive Committee to actively participate in the ongoing human resources investigation, being led by the independent investigator, to respond to and resolve the staff complaints in good faith, and to refrain from making any public comments in the media in the interim, until the investigation has been completed and reported on to the Chiefs in Assembly. 3, direct the AFN to schedule a special assembly for Chiefs in Assembly to receive the report from the HR investigator. 4, direct the AFN Executive and the Secretariat to identify and dedicate resources to fully implement AFN Resolution 13-2020, becoming a role model in ending sexual orientation and gender-based discrimination within the Assembly of First Nations, in conjunction with an independent third-party investigation into the climate of toxicity, bullying, lateral violence, and financial practices at the AFN. 5, direct the AFN Executive and Secretariat to hire an independent auditor to A, conduct an independent third-party forensic audit into the previous 8 years of financial activity of the AFN, with particular attention to recent AFN salary payouts and contracts, and B, conduct a digital investigation into alleged breaches of communication at the AFN Secretariat. 6, direct that investigations be overseen by a Chiefs Oversight Panel comprised of 5 chiefs chosen by the Chiefs in Assembly, each of whom are not subject to any of the accusations, have not participated in the recent draconian suspension activities, and are in good standing in their communities. And the final, therefore, be it resolved, 7, direct that the independent panel return to the Chiefs in Assembly with updates and a final report by end of fiscal year 2022. We have the good version now, mover and seconder? So, it is now time to open the period of discussion. We'll be opening the period of discussion now, and as process dictates, our mover will have 5 minutes, our seconder will have 3 minutes, and any subsequent chief will have 3 minutes too. So, if I could have microphone 2 opened, Chief Wendy Jocko, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Miigwech, Wendy Jocko, Algonquins Pikwakanagan First Nation, Ontario. I confirm that I am the mover for this resolution. So, every organization has problems and disagreements. The test of its integrity comes in how well the problems are handled, how fair and transparent the processes are, find the truth, make fair decisions based on previously decided procedures, and learn from it, and make it known what has been done. Follow due process. Again, learn from it. There have been several friendly amendments As you can see, I don't believe that they are complete either, so I'm going to afford Chief Lance Heyman my time allocation, so if he can have my 4 minutes, I would certainly appreciate that. Miigwech.
Thank you, Chief Jocko. So, for Chief Jocko's final 4 minutes, go to our seconder, Lance Heyman, and then you will have your 3 minutes as seconder. If we could have microphone 2 opened.
Good afternoon. Kwe, hello, bonjour. Chief Lance Heyman, Anishinaabe, Algonquin community of Quebec, Quebec region. I want to recognize the host drum, the prayer by the Knowledge Keepers, and want to thank the Tree host nations for welcoming us and letting us conduct our business on their territory. You know, it's been a long couple of days, and you know, we've waited patiently for an opportunity to bring forward this resolution. You know, and we've heard a lot of discussion around the allegations, but we're all sitting here acting like the allegations made by the National Chief about the financial irregularities is something new, and we've been told it is in the retaliation for the complaints lodged against her. I tend to disagree, and I'll tell you why. I remember the National Chief raising this issue 15 months ago prior to the start of the election for National Chief, when she was still the Regional Chief of Ontario. You know, as chiefs, we have all heard the rumors of contracts being awarded to those who shouldn't have been contracted because of potential or real conflicts of interest. Nothing was done about it then because the election process for the National Chief started, but it didn't go unforgotten after Roseanne was elected as our first woman National Chief in July. The rumors persisted about potential improprieties with the previous administration, so much so that in our Chiefs Assembly, we adopted a resolution, which I'm guessing many of the chiefs here in this room have forgotten. Not surprising, given we adopt 40+ resolutions every assembly. It was Resolution 11-2021, improving Assembly of First Nations financial procedures to reinforce transparency and accountability to and advance First Nations jurisdiction priorities and interests. The mover was Chief Roberta Joseph from the Yukon. The seconder was Cassellium from BC. I want to read out the resolution. Therefore, be it resolved that the Chiefs in Assembly direct the AFN Executive Committee to provide the Chiefs in Assembly each year and prior to the commencement of a new fiscal period, budget projections for those funding proposals that have been submitted for the upcoming fiscal year. This projection will outline the proposed annual operating budget and spending priorities of the AFN in order that the First Nation members can provide recommendations to inform the resulting AFN annual operational and spending priorities. 2, direct the AFN Executive Committee as part of their responsibility to monitor and control the financial resources of AFN and in accordance with the principles of accountability and transparency to review the financial reports monthly or quarterly with a purpose to ensure regional parity in the distribution of AFN resources to financially support the regional and national implementation of the AFN mandates and in compliance with AFN financial policies, procedures, and conflict of interest requirements. Direct the AFN Executive Committee to strike an external review committee comprised of one chief or expert from each respective region to conduct a review of AFN financial policies and practices and provide a report with recommendations to the AFN Executive Committee with the intent of implementing those recommendations in the 2022-23 fiscal year. This review will have at a minimum the following scope. A, identify how the current practices and process of awarding contracts is exercised. B, review any concerns past or present with conflicts of interest with respect to AFN Executive Committee members and AFN management. Make recommendations to strengthen financial policies and procedures with respect to conflict of interest. D, review policies and processes with respect to transparency, accountability, and reporting to the AFN Executive Committee on contracts awarded, regardless of value. And E, make recommendations on potential amendments to the financial policies and procedures on how to ensure greater transparency and accountability and consistency with the other governance tools and processes. As I stand here today, nothing has been done to action this resolution. Nothing. This work was and is crucial, and as a result of the inaction by the Executive and the Secretariat, here we are, we find ourselves in this predicament, and thus the need for the resolution which Chief Jocko and I have brought forward. What is the executive and the secretariat, I guess for me, is trying to hide, and why wasn't this work started? It was so important, and it would have addressed and confirmed, what some of the allegations that the National Chief has been saying all along. We have important work to do here on behalf of the people and nations we represent. So let's get this resolution behind us so we can get started on that work. We've been waiting since yesterday, to get this resolution on the floor. My final point is that I wish we would expend as much time, effort, and energy fighting provincial and federal governments and defending our rights and title as we do amongst ourselves. I do want to make an additional amendment while
You have about 1 minute.
while I'm up at the floor,
Yep.
and it's under E. Chiefs in Assembly affirmed on July 5th, 22, that the National Chief, Roseanne Archibald, is no longer suspended for a role, and that her AFN email, phone, and other benefits be reactivated immediately. I would add further that it be retroactive to June 17, 2022. It's when the regional chiefs and the executive suspended her. And so it should not reflect that that decision was made yesterday, but it should reflect that the suspension was illegal and that it should be retroactive back to June 17th, the date of which the executive suspended her. And I know that my fellow chiefs from Yukon and BC have really helped in terms of providing friendly amendments, and I suspect that those standing behind me will be offering more. So again, we're open to strengthening this resolution because it provides a path and a clear direction going forward, and it's really important that we get this passed. Thank you.
Well, and Chief Heyman. So I will confirm that your amendment is on point E in the whereas. At the end of the sentence, we add further that it be retroactive back to June 17th, 2022. Correct? We're good? Resolutions Committee says we're good, so I will look towards our mover. Do you approve the friendly amendment to add further that it be retroactive back to June 17th, 2022? We have approval from the mover. Perfect. So now we had our mover and seconder both address the floor. So we will start with microphone 1, microphone 2, and go see if we have people on Zoom. And I'll look towards my team to confirm if anyone is on the phone lines, please. So if we could open microphone number 1.
Hi, good afternoon. Doreen Cardinal-Summers, proxy chief for Chief Keeter Corson, Chapel Cree First Nation. I want to thank Chiefs Jocko and Heyman for their hard work on this resolution and just ask for a friendly amendment that the audit extend to the regional offices if there's any issues identified. I also wanted to ask that it would be the Confederacy of Nations be mandated to do this work. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So we have a proposed amendment. I believe that will be in. Is there a TBIR specifically that you wish to include that in?
I would like to answer that, but we only have it flashed up on the screen for a few seconds and we didn't get the paper copy.
We'll work with distribution to make sure that it's handed out. Thank you for that. So we have in therefore be it resolved 5, direct the AFN executive and secretariat to hire an independent auditor to A, conduct an independent third-party forensic audit into the previous 8 years of financial activity of the AFN, with particular attention to recent AFN salary payouts and contracts. And then we have to point B, conduct a digital investigation into alleged breaches of communication at the AFN Secretariat. So the most appropriate place for the proposed friendly amendment would be in point A, where we add, do you have specific language that you would so desire or propose to the Could I have microphone 1 open, please?
So in 5A, at the end,
Yep.
if we include, and this be extended to regional offices if issues have been identified.
This be extended to regional offices. And this be extended to regional offices if issues have been identified in 5A. Perfect. Thank you for your proposed amendment. I will look towards our mover and seconder. So the proposed amendment is in, therefore be it resolved 5, subpoint A. At the end of the sentence, add, and this be extended to regional offices if issues have been identified. If we could have microphone 2 open, please.
Yes, we're good with that amendment.
I see a thumbs up from the seconder, so I will look towards our resolution committee. Thank you for that proposed amendment. If we can go to microphone 2.
Anin kinawea, zogawi dijnikaz, bizing dunjaba, shagadudem. Good afternoon, everybody. Chief Macleod, Nipissing First Nation from Ontario. I guess first I want to start by apologizing to our youth. I have heard you, and I'm humbled by your words. I also want to apologize to the family of the missing young boy, as well as the elders, and as well as our people who are back home suffering from trauma, addictions, our children in care, our homeless brothers and sisters that are out on the street right here. I want to apologize to them. I want to apologize to them for us sitting here for 1.5 days arguing about millions of dollars while we sleep in $400 room hotels and we eat buffets and we get nothing done. I want to apologize to them for that. I want to apologize. Lastly, for our dysfunctional leadership that we're all providing to them. What I want to say right now is that I'm looking for a point of order. Ontario caucus spent about an hour during lunch reviewing the resolution, only to come here and see it put up on the screen, and it didn't look anything like what we were reviewing. And before I could even get to the mic, the mover and seconder were making friendly amendments to their own resolution that we hadn't seen yet, and we still don't have a hard copy for. I'm asking for this resolution to be tabled so we have proper time to review it. And make our suggestions. We're running in all this stuff way too fast. We are acting in a knee-jerk reaction to everything that's happening, and we're digging ourselves into a deeper hole every minute of every day that we've been here so far. I think we need to put the brakes on this and look at it and really understand what the issues are and make some good leadership decisions. I want this resolution tabled, please.
So a point of order has been raised by Chief Scott Macleod of Nipissing. So we will take a few moments to consult with my co-chair here and come back with a decision on the point of order. Thank you for your patience. So the the chairs are in agreement that this motion should be tabled for the moment as distribution hands out paper copies so that chiefs may have it in front of them. We will also be looking with the team so that the updated versions, making sure that those are the ones that are sent within the Zoom chat. And we'll table it for now. And go towards. So we will table. So that we will now, in response to the point of order, table this discussion for emergency draft resolution number 1 for 10 minutes. We will come back at 3:05 to further the discussion. We have microphone number 1.
Thank you. I just wanted to raise a question about process. My understanding from the rule book or the procedures that amendments need to be submitted in writing to the resolutions committee so that the amendments can actually be displayed on screen when they are brought forward as well. I believe that's my understanding of the process around amendments. So I know that there's going to be lots of questions and there was comments around amendments, so I just wanted to seek clarification on what the rules state around the process for amendments to resolutions once they're live on the floor. But you can come back in 10 minutes and answer that if you want.
We'll take our 10-minute recess and come back. Thank you.
Late night on a bus in my neighborhood. An old man is wakened by a scuffle across the aisle. There's a boy with a bottle.
To address the point of order. It's been brought to our attention too, and we see that the paper copies are being distributed at this moment. So it is requested that the plenary be suspended for 45 minutes so that regions would have the opportunity to go back into caucus and address the situation. This is a proposition brought forward by the chairs so that all chiefs would have the adequate opportunity to consult each other, discuss on the revised edition of ER 01. I'm looking to the floor to see if I have any opposition, if ever.
And on the line, on the Zoom, there's no discussion on that. Usually.
Seeing none, or yeah, we have microphone 1, please. We wish to hear from the Assembly before continuing on with our decision. So,
Complete opposition to suspending for 45 minutes. I think we've spent enough time on this. We had a vote yesterday to reinstate the national chief. Let's deal with the audit issue and let's move forward. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you. Does microphone 2 want to speak on the proposition of the chairs?
I was going to speak on the motion. Is that?
We'll come back to that then.
Yeah.
Thank you. I see we have Grand Chief Mandy Galmasti's hand raised in the Zoom chat. Is this to address the proposition by the chairs?
I had an amendment for the resolution.
So we will come back to that, Grand Chief Master. Thank you. Is microphone number 1 for process?
And to speak to the proposition by the co-chairs.
Please. Microphone number 1.
On the proposition by the co-chairs, I don't support delaying for 45 minutes on, what are we on? Resolution 3 of this whole thing? 1 out of 100. We have some other resolutions that we need to get to. And I know for all of us, and I'm going to segue into process on my question that I asked a few minutes ago. Just for all the delegates here, things are going to get very frustrating and very difficult because we all want to see the resolution go in different directions at times, and that's the conflict. We have different visions of what words should be in there, not in there, and that kind of stuff. The problem is, if we don't do amendments in a very commonly understood way, everybody's going to get frustrated about whether an amendment is accepted or not accepted. I think the easiest thing we can do is let's take whatever version of the resolution that we all have the same eyes on, and it looks like one was just distributed. And I really think we just need to move forward on a vote on that resolution. And if I need to call questions so we could shut down debate and just force ourselves to make a decision, and we can ask ourselves, can we live with what's in there? Or do we have to spend an hour going back and forth on every little word in detail? And the question is, can I live with what's there? Every resolution that comes up, I don't love every resolution that comes up, but I ask myself, can I live with it? And most of the time I say yes, and sometimes I say no and I vote no. But I think we just need to accept that we can't let perfect get in the way of good. We need to be able to move forward. So I don't know what resolution is out there because I've seen a few. But whatever resolution we can vote on, I just want to move forward and vote on it. I think I'll probably vote yes, I think, from what I've seen so far. I might not, depending on what's changed. And I'll vote no. And if the resolution dies, that's on the people who crafted the resolution to come back with a better one after consulting more people. But I think we need to call for some votes on some resolutions sometime today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kilsalem. Thank you, Chairperson Kilsalem. We have the microphone 2, please.
See, I don't even have the amended one. I'm just getting it now. I agree, that we do need to move on, but I'm not about to chop my nose off to spite my face. I need time to look at the resolution. This was totally changed from the time I spent looking at it and reviewing it to the time I saw it, and it's probably still changing as we speak. So we've already wasted almost 10 minutes now of the 45-minute break. We need some time to look at it. What is the problem with chiefs being allowed time to actually review it properly?
So as chair, the final decision comes to us, but again, this is your assembly and I really want chiefs. So what I could propose as a solution is asking for those who want a 40-minute break just to raise your hands. We'll get an idea of the feeling of elected representatives that are here, and then I will be able to make my final decision based on your suggestions. So those who are for a 40-minute suspension, so that we can go to a 40-minute suspension so that chiefs have the opportunity to revise the proposed and revised agenda. Are there those who are for? If you can please raise your lanyards.
Please raise your lanyards if you want to suspend for 45 minutes.
If you wish to suspend for 45 minutes in order to allow the review. Keep them raised as our distribution team verifies. So those who want to suspend the Assembly in order to have an additional 45 minutes to discuss the revised edition of Emergency Draft Resolution Number 1, Investigation and Audit of the AFN's Financial and Management Practices, those who desire 45 additional minutes. We also have a poll that has been raised for our people. So the question now is, you can lower your lanyards, thank you. The distribution team has counted those who are for. And now if I could have those who are against taking a 45 minutes break to examine draft resolution, emergency draft resolution number 1 as it has been revised. Those who are against and do not wish to have a 45-minute break. And those who wish to proceed with the resolutions process. Thank you. Distribution team will look towards the final vote for a motion to take a 45-minute break so that you can evaluate emergency draft resolution number 1, investigation and audit of AFN's financial and management practices. Until we get that number, we're going to wait for the results of the vote. Proxy Kelly. Look towards our distribution for the final count. Yeah. We are still addressing the point of order that was raised, so we'll be looking towards distribution with the results. So the Assembly has spoken. We have for the motion to suspend for 45 minutes, 93 votes for and 95 votes against. So we will proceed with the Assembly as so chosen by the Assembly in resolution number 1, draft emergency resolution number 1, investigation and audit of AFN's financial and management practices. I'd have to look towards the Assembly, make sure that you guys have the copy, the most updated copy that was distributed. I'll go towards microphone number 2.
I think to consider, I understand that the Nipissing chief wanting to get back together with his chiefs and his caucus to review. I agree with that, and what I'm concerned about is that I'm here for a limited time. We all are. That we take the time to table that resolution, and then we have all these other resolutions. I mean, we didn't even get an opportunity. We had a panel. The most important ruling right now, we had the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. We talked about the $20 billion compensation. The $40 billion AIP. We haven't even had a conversation about that, and that's the most important thing that we need to talk about right now. Not even on the agenda, other than the panel. So I want to just provide a reasonable solution so that the chiefs can caucus and discuss this resolution in the evening and table it for tomorrow. I think that makes perfect sense. And let's move on with the other resolutions.
Thank you. Thank you for that proposition. So, as chair, and seeing the situation as it is right now, I do agree. We will table this motion, ensure that our AFN staff offers the appropriate and revised version to all chiefs, and we will put this back on the agenda for tomorrow morning. First thing, we'll look at the agenda and confirm tomorrow. Draft Emergency Resolution 1 has been tabled until tomorrow. Microphone 2, please.
You can tell I don't need the thunder stick. People tell me this is fat. It's not fat, it's a windbag. If I want the room to hear me, I just take a deep breath. If I want to go for 5 minutes, I take a short breath. If I want to go for an hour, I take a deep breath. Now, the BCAFN staff should be asked to work with the Yukon and others. I'm sorry. I'm serious about that breakdown. It's a huge breakdown. And so there's a trust issue there. So I suggest that we call upon Regional Chief Terry and Regional Chief Kluani to put a little team together to be responsible for the amendments, because that table's dropped the ball at least 4 times now. I'm done with that table.
Sorry.
Please, please, Executive, agree that Kluani and Terry can ask their staff to support.
Please. Thank you. This is not the way we conduct an assembly. Please, you need to be recognized by the chair first. We're chairing. Please respect our work. We respect all of you, but not only one person, all of you. Okay? Thank you. Thank you. Merci. First. Second, we tabled draft resolution, emergency resolution number 1 until tomorrow because we think we heard you. You didn't have time and you didn't receive the right version. So we heard you. We agree with you and you all decided to table it from what we heard. Thank you. So for this, we're changing topic. We lost enough time on that. And now, please welcome me to by inviting Chief here. I want to address you in regards to an important matter, and I want to ask the technician, please, in the back, to please put this on the screen, the PowerPoint you put before with the youth. Frank, with Frank, please. It would be really appreciated. Thank you to give time to Chief Marcel Head. Thank you, Chief Head, to you. Merci.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to take a few moments to thank each and every one of you for donating yesterday to the cause of Little Frank that you have on the screen up there. You raised over $13,000 to the donation of finding Little Frank. Give yourselves a round of applause. We still have our family representative. We at the corner over there, Teresa Waitcap. And I understand some of you are still wanting to make a generous donation to the cause of finding Frank. So this is the donation, that you can send to find help find Little Frank, and it's that email address right there, charlenehead@redearthcreation.com. That's where all the funds are going to go and to help find Frank. But those of you that have been asking, that's just write it down and go back to your caucus if you want to make any more donations. That's where it'll go. And the donations will go, as I said yesterday, is to the full operation of the things like ATVs, Argos, that are going into the swamp to find Frank. So that's where, and these machines are breaking down on us, and we need to pay for the repairs. So that's where the money is going. And again, on behalf of the family, the Laughlin, Young, and the Mackay family, we certainly appreciate, all your help. And also to the youth that addressed us this morning, I appreciate, the comments that were raised by our youth, and as well as the chief that made the apology this afternoon. Yeah, we do have a heavy schedule, as chiefs, and we do understand that. But when something like this, is a matter of importance, we like to at least, have your presence when we do things like this. So, again, thank you to all the Assembly registered, and we certainly appreciate you on behalf of the family. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Merci. This is a really important matter also, so thank you. Merci. Hope for Frank. Okay, so as we continue on our important day with important matters, the next item on the agenda is a plenary session on policing. So I will now introduce the First Nations policing as an essential service legislation, and Regional Chief Ghislain Picard from Quebec-Labrador region will introduce this panel, but while he'll come to join me on the assembly microphone here on the podium, I will ask that if you are in the room, because I don't have that specific, so if you're in the room or if you're online, I want to make sure that Chris Morin is there, ADM for Public Safety Canada. I'm inviting the panelists now. So Chris Morin, Chief Gerald Swamp, President of First Nation Chiefs of Police Association, Chief Keith Blake, Tsuut'ina Nation Police Service, and Chief Dwayne Zachary, Ganawage Peacekeepers. You are I'm inviting you to come and join us on the stage, please, if you're here. But if you're here, I will also ask, maybe we can make room for you just there. I see Dwayne. I'm happy to see you. It's been a long time. Yes. Hi, Dwayne. How are you doing? Good. Yeah. Just say one last thought again. So first, I'm gonna invite Regional Chief Picard first, and then we'll organize with the other panelists. Thank you, Regional Chief.
Merci beaucoup, Wina. Good afternoon, and very important issue regarding policing, and we'll try to provide you an update on where the issue is at today, and try to provide you with an update on the need for policing reform, and with the goal of having the proper authorities recognize policing as an essential service. This issue has been on our agenda for quite some time, going back at least to 2016. The federal minister at the time was Ralph Goodale, and he certainly was in agreement that First Nation policing had to be legislated. So my name is Ghislain Picard. I'm the Regional Chief for Quebec and Labrador, and has been for quite some time also a member of the Executive. So I'm certainly happy to welcome all of you to this annual General Assembly. We have, as Executive members, different portfolios, and I certainly, wanting to speak on behalf of my colleagues, I think are deeply committed to the responsibilities that we hold as an executive, as executive members, and so I'm certainly happy to be representing this portfolio on behalf of my colleagues, and tag teaming with my friend and colleague, Regional Chief TG, because justice and public safety are two portfolios that are combined. And certainly happy as well to be supporting my colleague, Regional Chief Kloani Adamek, on the Youth Council portfolio. I would like to extend my gratitude to elders for the opening prayer and starting us off in a good way today. And I certainly would like to acknowledge the hosting nations, the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Throughout my time as Regional Chief, I have advocated for the need for policing reform for our communities, and specifically the need for reform to the First Nation policing program. And as we all know, that program has been funding our policing services for the last 30 years. Now, more than ever, First Nations want control over their own policing services. I believe the right way forward is the recognition of First Nation policing as an essential service. The Assembly of First Nations will continue to support our regional partners in a collaborative way to carry out an engagement process to jointly create real changes for First Nation police services. In early 2020, the federal government announced it would create new First Nation policing legislation. Since the announcement, the Assembly of First Nations has been working closely with First Nation leaders and chiefs of police to develop policy options for a legislative framework. This framework would replace the current First Nation policing program, FNPP, which for the last 30 years has been chronically underfunded, leading to inequitable standards and resources for First Nation policing services. As per our mandate, Resolution 34-2021, support for regionally developed First Nation policing services, our goal at the AFN is to ensure that First Nation police get the funding, resources, infrastructure, and personnel they have not been able to access under the FNPP. One way we have been working to meet our mandate is supporting the AFN regions to carry out engagement processes so First Nations can give direct input into the new policing legislative framework. In fact, each AFN region was funded $250,000 to carry out engagement sessions with interested parties and key stakeholders. Ensuring that First Nations lead the development of legislation is a keystone to not only addressing systemic racism against First Nations, but to enable our right to self-determination as outlined in our customary laws, historic treaty processes, and in the United Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Another way we have been working to meet this mandate is through the AFN First Nation Policing Task Force. This committee is made up of regional representatives, technical experts, and executive members of the First Nation Chiefs of Police Association who meet regularly to provide support and guidance for the development of a new First Nation policing legislative framework. In March 2021, the Assembly of First Nations held the first National Forum on First Nation Policing and Justice. The forum was the start of the discussion around how to co-develop essential services legislation for First Nation policing. We understand that furthering discussion and dialogue are important aspects to ensuring that First Nations voices are heard, especially in the context of developing the First Nation policing legislative framework. That is why the AFN held a second National Forum on First Nation Policing and Restorative Justice this year, in which participants expressed their visions for police and justice reforms, as well as what First Nation policing legislation could look like. On April 6, 2022, the AFN held the second National Forum on First Nation Policing. The second forum brought together First Nation panelists and participants to discuss First Nation policing as an essential service and to provide an opportunity for First Nation leaders, First Nation police officers, and policing experts, among others, to consider options in the development of a legislative framework for First Nation policing as an essential service. There were several moderated discussion groups to ensure participants felt they had adequate opportunities to provide their input. The dialogue sessions with participants were more focused on and aimed to gathering input from First Nations on what they want to see included in the legislation. We understand there's a lot of work to do to address systemic racism in this country and to overcome the distrust that First Nations feel towards Canadian police. That is why we are working to fulfill the mandates that would place the control of First Nation policing services back into the hands of First Nations. There needs to be strong leadership at all levels to implement the kind of fundamental changes needed to overhaul policing. Greater civilian oversight that is inclusive of First Nations peoples and communities is needed. Zero tolerance of excessive use of force, higher recruitment standards which identify racial biases and mental health training are needed. We want to see changes to policing that demonstrate a holistic approach to the social, economic, and political well-being of our communities, and policing reform is a key element to that approach. Building upon the countless recommendations for policing reform we have heard from both forums, we have a real opportunity to discuss how we can reform policing services to meet the unique needs of First Nations across the nation. The recognition of First Nation policing as an essential service represents a real opportunity to remedy a long-standing discriminatory program that has negatively impacted First Nations for decades. Our First Nations policing services are subject to predetermined funding amounts which do not reflect the needs of our communities. The FNPP is discriminatory. This is not a statement that is based upon my own assessment or that of First Nations. The inadequacy and funding inequities of the First Nations policing program have been long documented of the past 30-plus years. They have led to tragedies in our communities, and they are a source of constant stress and frustration. It is time that First Nations are funded at the same levels of non-First Nations, and that our police are recognized and treated as the essential service that they are. Developing this legislative framework requires input from First Nations from across the country, and in the coming months, regional engagement will be carried out to ensure that the framework is inclusive and flexible to meet the needs of First Nations and First Nation policing services across the country. Sorry. The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls in Call for Justice 5.4 called upon, and I quote, all governments to immediately and dramatically transform Indigenous policing from its current state as a mere delegation to an exercise in self-governance and self-determination over policing, end of quote. We want equitable resources for First Nation policing and to respect First Nation jurisdiction over First Nation policing. Excuse me. First Nation policing needs support and resources to succeed. As well, our First Nations police officers deserve the same recognition and resources as mainstream policing services. It is our hope that together we can make this a reality. Senator Scammell, thank you very much.
Thank you for your update, Regional Chief Picard. I now inviting to take the microphone. We have a portable microphone here on the stage, so I now invite for an update on engagement and co-development process, Chris Morin, ADM for Public Safety Canada, to address the Assembly. Thank you to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Madame. I am honored to be here today, and I appreciate the invitation. So thank you, National Chief and Regional Chiefs and delegates, and all of the elders for this invitation to provide an update here on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. I want to honor these nations' history of inviting people to this beautiful territory, and thank you for the opportunity. So, as mentioned, my name is Christine Morin, and I am the Assistant Deputy Minister for the Indigenous Secretariat at Public Safety. I actually joined Public Safety in December. My background is not in policing, and so I've been on, as many in the room know, a very steep learning curve, but I appreciate the conversations that I've had to date, and I certainly rely on the knowledge of people who have shared it with me to date. My role is to lead the task force at Public Safety that has been working with the Assembly of First Nations to co-develop the police services legislation. And I'd like to provide you today with an update on the engagement that we've had thus far and next steps for us. We know that First Nations in Canada and the FNCPA, I'm joined by members of the First Nations Chiefs of Police Association, have long called for reform to how First Nations police services are funded and have advocated for federal legislation that recognizes First Nations policing as an essential service. Our work stems from the June 2017 MOU between the Prime Minister and the then National Chief, which stated that the first joint priority was policing and community safety issues affecting First Nations. In addition, those calls for reform were heightened with the release, as Chief Picard says, with the final report of the National Inquiry into the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. The provision of police services, which are professional, effective, culturally appropriate, and accountable, is critical to build safe and healthy communities. And the ultimate goal of the legislation is to recognize police services as an essential service. It's our aim that this legislation will better support First Nations police services to do just that. And we know that the First Nations police services, the officers and the staff, have a positive impact on the communities that you serve in spite of limited resources. We know this because our data bears it out. I can speak to a very key point which was identified by the First Nations Council on Information Governance, which says that a full 1/3 of respondents from communities with a self-administered service see policing as a strength compared to less than 10% of communities that don't have that. We also have seen a decrease in crime in those communities. So, as Chief Picard and I have noted, we're working on co-development, and we also know that this is done through establishing trust, respect, and understanding. Engagement and collaboration are central to co-development of the legislation, and our engagement approach provided 3 key avenues for discussing this issue, including virtual engagement sessions, an online engagement platform, and an email where we could receive direct feedback. We do remain flexible, though. This is a conversation, it's a discussion that we see, and we will continue to meet with First Nations to discuss your policing and your community safety priorities via bilateral dialogues. So there's a small team at Public Safety. We want to meet with you. We want to hear from you. The Government of Canada and the Assembly of First Nations are undertaking separate engagement processes. What is heard in both of those processes will be used to support the co-development of the legislation. But I also want to underscore the role of key partners. So we're committed to working collaboratively with key partners through bilateral discussions. Provinces and territories, for example, have legislative responsibility for the administration of justice, including policing. For this reason, the Government of Canada is committed to working in collaboration with these to ensure that the federal legislation complements the provincial and territorial policing legislation, regulations, and frameworks already in place. And recognizing that Canada has a unique relationship with First Nations which have signed modern treaty and self-government agreements, we also know it's necessary to directly engage these on their priorities. And of course, we know that the legislation couldn't be developed without drawing on the technical expertise of the First Nations Chiefs of Police Association and the First Nations Police Governance Council. So we are very grateful to them for their advice. Again, I want to underscore the flexibility and our intent to maintain a collaborative approach. Through our virtual engagement sessions, including the session that we had with the Quebec region, and in dialogue conversations I've had with First Nations, we've asked participants to reflect on policing priorities on 3 themes: police service as an essential service, the roles of First Nations, provinces, territories, and the federal government in supporting First Nations police services, and funding. Participants have offered a very wide range of ideas for how the legislation could meet their policing and community safety priorities, and I want to briefly touch on some of what we've heard. Overall, I don't think it will come as any surprise, participants were unanimous that the First Nations and Inuit policing program is inadequate to fulfill the vision of First Nations police services. That is very clear. Participants highlighted limited funding, the restrictive terms and conditions, and a lack of local influence over funding decision-making processes. While some participants have expressed concern with the length of time that it's taken to make progress on this legislation, others had concerns with proceeding at an ambitious pace, with a concern that we needed to ensure that all First Nations are appropriately engaged and that we're hearing from everyone on the policy options as they're developed. We are aware of that, and again, we're striving to ensure that the discussion is open and that people have an opportunity to provide us with their viewpoints. In analyzing all of the input that we've received so far, and I want to stress that we had 13 virtual engagement sessions and many conversations bilaterally, and those continue. But we're starting to see 5 themes emerging, and these will inform the co-development process. First of all, recognizing police services as an essential service in that they should not be funded through a program. Number 2, establishing funding that's adequate, stable, predictable, equitable, flexible, and responsive to First Nations police services needs. Number 3, recognizing First Nations' direct role in policing and community safety priorities. Supporting relationship building to provide holistic and community-driven community safety interventions, and articulating federal, provincial, and First Nations roles and ensuring compatibility with provincial legislation. I'll touch on each of these in a little more detail. So what we've heard is that with an essential service, it really is clear that we need to, first of all, recognize this in a fundamental way. So philosophically and actually. It means guaranteed access by all. It means that they are substantially equivalent to non-Indigenous police services, and that it has to evolve from a real relationship and a contractual and programmatic approach that recognizes this. And number 3, it must be respectful and culturally responsive. With respect to funding, and this was certainly an issue of critical importance, we know that there are serious concerns about the way and the level of funding that is being provided. To describe the funding, participants were using words like stable, adequate, predictable, equitable, flexible, and in fact, we have kept a very long list of the words that we were hearing, but those were the ones that kept coming up over and over. We know and we have heard that the funding must not be dependent on a discretionary program, but must be based on strategic and long-term planning that is responsive to the police services operational requirements and to the community policing priorities. It needs to provide competitive compensation and benefits packages to recruit and retain, and we recognize that that ability to recruit and retain is really important for community safety and not just for equity and parity. Maintaining adequate equipment and materiel and safe police facilities is another thing that was raised. Specialized services, again, one of the restrictions is that there's a limited ability to provide specialized services, and there was a request that we need to address that. And then the need for more training on cultural competency and the enforcement of First Nations laws and bylaws. Many in our engagement sessions were looking not only at the self-administered police services, but the way policing is provided generally, and this issue came up over and over. Participants also expressed that they see having a First Nations police service and having influence over policing priorities as an expression of self-determination and self-governance. Participants emphasized that this requires building healthy relationships and clearly defining roles with the federal and provincial government levels as well. And they raised the point that they expect the legislation would respect First Nations rights to self-determination and self-government, govern Canada's conduct with respect to supporting First Nations policing, and respect provincial and territorial roles. This was an important point for many to ensure that there is equity and parity between the police services that are operated and self-administered by First Nations and with municipal forces. First Nations also noted that they expect to be involved in decision-making. I think that's self-explanatory. We know that this legislation is an opportunity to further support and really push forward on building those healthier and more respectful and collaborative relationships. And we also recognize that some of the issues that were raised could be used to inform improvements in the program. So we are also looking at how we could make some headway on that. Are there changes to the program in the immediate term that we could effect incrementally, that we could just adopt to improve things in the interim? In terms of next steps, we're working on releasing publicly a What We Heard report. We expect that that will be released in the next few weeks, and it would be posted on the Public Safety Canada website. Of course, we will ensure that our partners at the AFN have a copy of that as well to share on their website. We'll continue to collaborate with the Assembly of First Nations, with the First Nations Chiefs of Police Association, the Police Governance Council, and provinces and territories to further analyze the issues that were heard during the engagement process, to understand and inform the co-development of legislation that recognizes these police services as essential. We'll continue collaborative discussions as well into the fall, and we want to ensure that that dialogue is continuing. We're working also towards an expert symposium or possibly symposia, as well as some technical working groups, because we realize there are certain issues that require a very deep dive, with a small group of First Nations Police Services experts to further inform critical technical issues. And then, informed by all of the perspectives heard through the engagement and the collaborative processes, Government of Canada intends to co-develop elements to inform legislation with the Assembly of First Nations. And as this process unfolds, we remain committed to open engagement and to checking in with our collaboration partners as required. I want to just touch very briefly on some additional investments that we've made in the program. So the program, the First Nations and Inuit Policing Program, did receive an infusion and an investment of funding in Budget 2021, and we continue to roll that money out. You can see there that there are a number of areas where we're putting some investments, stabilization and expansion of the program to strengthen existing self-administered forces and to ensure that communities that do not yet have access to the program are able to get access. And we are also looking at investments in policing facilities. We know that policing is not the only way to achieve community safety, so we're also looking at crime prevention and community safety investments. And we are working closely with our colleagues at ISK on the New Pathways to Safe Indigenous Communities initiative. I want to note that although the funding, I think, brought some relief, the renewal of the police services agreements and of the framework agreements did certainly bring to light gaps that still need to be addressed in order to push forward on this issue. I think that it's important to also note that the investments here represent a step forward, and we are committed to ensuring that we have a holistic approach where community safety is concerned. I want to emphasize as well that we are available for discussion. Many of you have had bilateral discussions with me or with the team that's working on this, and we would definitely encourage you to continue to reach out. We want to hear from you, and we're happy to have that discussion. So once again, thank you so much for making time for me on the agenda. I appreciate it, and I'm here for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much for your presentation on an update on engagement and co-developing process. I noticed that there are people, our chiefs, at the microphone assembly or the assembly microphone, but we're not dealing with questions. We will continue. I'm sorry. I've been told that we don't take questions for this presentation. We cannot. We don't have enough time. And on Monday, on dialogue sessions, there were a session on First Nations policing, and that was the moment that questions have been dealt with. And if we would have at least 4 hours more today, I would give you like all the time you would need, and I'm really sorry for that, but it's not in my capacity. So for the two last speakers on this panel, we'll hear a First Nation Chiefs of Police Association's position on essential services legislation, and I don't know who first will start, but okay, so I will announce Chief Dwayne Zachary Ganawage Peacekeepers to please address the Assembly. Thank you, Dwayne.
Yeah, perfect, thanks.
And if they can put the PowerPoint.
Is it? Yeah, there it is. Perfect. Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased. Thank you for the opportunity to address the AFN. Thank you for inviting me here on the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories, nations. I'd like to recognize the national chief and the regional chiefs as well. I know my grand chief is out there somewhere as well too, so thank you for attending. The FNCPA, the First Nation Chiefs of Police Association, put together an essential service position paper. And what we wanted that to do was we wanted to evoke some thought on where First Nation policing should be going and what direction it's going. Myself, Dwayne Zachary, the Chief Peacekeeper of the Ganawage Peacekeepers, and Keith Blake, the Chief of Police for Tsuut'ina Nation, will be discussing that. I'm going to do a portion of our presentation as well. He will. The president of the FNCPA, Gerald Swamp, he was unable to attend, so I'm attending in his place and helping out with this. One of the awesome. Not no worries. All right. So I'm going to start with a history of the FNCPA. And what you need to know is that the First Nation Chiefs of Police Association began in 1993. It received recognition from the AFN as well as the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. And these are all notable organizations because they're national organizations and they have a lot of clout and weight in this community, in this country as well. First Nation Chiefs of Police Association, the purpose of our existence was we felt the need to have a place where First Nation police directors and First Nation police services communities could go and ask about maybe best practices, about accountability, about how to do certain things, because as you know, and as the Assistant Deputy Minister mentioned, like there are some huge gaps with the First Nation policing program, now known as the First Nation Inuit policing program. And with those gaps, there are always people out there who are very innovative, you know, and they're creative about the way they do things and about how services can be provided to First Nation communities. So having said that, we have this recognition from these other bodies, and we find it sometimes very difficult to move forward because we want people to be on the same page. And I don't know if you know, but across this country there are 36 First Nation self-administered departments. There is 1 in British Columbia, there are 3 in Alberta, 1 in Saskatchewan, 1 in Manitoba, 9 in Ontario, and 22 in Quebec. So when you look at it, there aren't very many First Nation police services, but we are out there and we do exist. And by and large, for the most part, we are considered very successful at what we do. We've heard this from our counterparts, some of the other services that are out there. They've come to us and asked us about our model, about how it can maybe be employed or emulated for other services like the RCMP, the OPP, and the Sûreté de Québec, some of the biggest services in this country. The FNCPA, and I'll move on here. So the recognition part is important for us because it's given us an opportunity to work with the AFN, Public Safety Canada, to have a say in the steering of what this legislation might look like going forward. And my portion of the presentation is more about where we are now, and Chief Blake will talk about what the position paper says itself. So right now, the FNPP, the First Nation FNIPP now, it's been in place since 1991. In 1991, there were approximately 58 First Nation communities that had a First Nation police service on their community. If you move forward about 20 years, there are only 36. So even though the program itself says that it was designed to help First Nation communities develop and create safer communities, you see that by virtue of the way it's going, it looks fairly bleak. Now, having said that, I'd also like to point out that even though there has been a reduction in First Nation policing services in the country, the 36 that remain are extremely successful at what they do. So even though we've been struggling through this, this program designation, we still find innovative and creative ways to continue to provide services to our community, which to us is paramount. Like, that's the most important thing, providing the services that are commensurate with the needs of our community. And each First Nation service provides a unique service to its community, because no two First Nation communities are the same, as you know. I wouldn't say that I could bring the Kahnawake peacekeepers and put them into another community and say it would be successful off the bat. We'd have to figure out a way of creating a relationship with that community and finding ways of developing and shaping our service for the needs of each of those communities, that type of thing. And I think that's where First Nation policing differs from the other models that are out there across Canada, municipal police services, national police services, because they have a product and they say, this is what you get. Our perspective is we want to work with our community and we want to develop something that works for everyone. The funding models are such that the federal government provides 52% of the funds, and within the provinces, they provide the other 48. So it's a 52-48 split. They are tripartite agreements. We have 3 separate streams, as you can see on the PowerPoint. One of them is the arrangement between the community, the province, and the feds. The other one is a contribution agreement similar to, but it could be something like, one of the examples I think is, if anyone knows, it's St. Mary's out in New Brunswick. They have a quadpartite agreement. It's with the municipality, the community, the federal government, and the province itself. And the third stream is something more like community safety officers. Community safety officers are very useful, and that's a different type of program. They don't have the law enforcement capabilities, but some communities are going that route, and those are the 3 types of streams that come from the First Nation Inuit policing program. Some of the additional limiting factors of the First Nation policing program are it doesn't allow us to do certain things. It almost puts us in a position where we feel like First Nation policing, and I've said this numerous times, it makes First Nation policing feel like it's a second-class citizen. You know, and it puts First Nation communities in a difficult position because that means that maybe your service isn't able to provide services that you may need in your community. Is that fair? No, absolutely not. Is that the way it should be done? No, absolutely not. Why is that? It's because the program limits us. And with all of these limitations, it creates gaps, and these gaps create safety issues. And for us, the main goal is safety and security and prosperity to our communities. So how do we get past this? And one of the big things that we felt was necessary was for First Nation police services to be designated as an essential service. So some of the areas where we're limited is we can't develop specialized programs, either forensics or specialized emergency response teams, all of those types of things. At the same time, many First Nation communities struggle with this program because there are long delays in getting the agreement signed by the feds, by the provinces, and then finally having the payments make it to their community. So sometimes, even though the fiscal year starts April 1st, you know, some communities are waiting and the payments are lagging behind for months and months and months. And for some communities, like, they're in dire straits. They need to have these finances right away. They have these services. They have these people who are relying on receiving these monies for doing their job, and there aren't any available. So what happens is some of these First Nation communities have to go out and they have to get a loan or a line of credit, and you know how the banks are. They require you to pay that money back, and there's always these percentage points, right? Interest, amortization, all of that stuff. It impacts the community because at the end of the day, what happens? Like, they've got to pay these additional charges back, and those are not allowable under the agreements. They call, so every year or however long your policing agreement is with your community, and it could be 1 year, it could be 5 years. Recently, there are some agreements that have gone longer for up to 10 years, but whenever we have these discussions, and we had discussions out there, and we were waiting to do this presentation for the entire day, so we had a long time to talk about how it would kind of unfold, and we came up with a lot of examples of how the First Nation policing program does affect us and how it does impact us. So every time your policing agreement comes up, they call it a negotiation, but it's not really. It's basically, here's your money, take it or leave it, because it's always there isn't enough money. The program only has a certain envelope of funds. The funds are only available for 5 years or what have you. And at the end of that 5 years, what do? Right? There's no job security. Many of our First Nation police officers, they don't see a future in it, and what do? They go and they find work elsewhere, you know, with some of these other services, where at least they know, you know, their budgets are set for 30 years or so. They know what's happening year to year to year. They can plan strategically. They can do a number of things that for us, it's very difficult to do, because sometimes from a year to year basis, we don't know if we're still going to exist, right? That's one of the pitfalls of being a program. Sometimes at the end of the program or the end of the funding envelope, sometimes those programs don't get renewed. And yes, we've been, I would say, extremely successful. First Nation policing has. We've lasted for a long time. The 36 self-administered departments that exist today, I feel will continue to exist. They have some great people working with them and for them. The teams are excellent. They work very hard at providing good services to your communities, which is excellent. And I think that the government is starting to realize that. So I don't think the program will end, but something definitely needs to change. And that's why at the First Nation Chiefs of Police Association, we had discussions about what is it that we're going to do? How are we going to get people to change? How are we going to get this program to change? How are we going to get, you know, safety and security to our First Nation communities? Because that's important to us. Becoming an essential service means a number of things for us. That means we're recognized. That means that there'll be a steady stream of the resources that are required for First Nation policing. You know, all of the things that were mentioned in the presentation just before I got up here, and that's valuable to us. And as the First Nation Chiefs of Police Association, we want to be included because in terms of First Nation policing, we are the experts. We've been doing this for a long time. We understand the situation. We have lots of communities who don't have their own service coming to us and asking us, how do we get this done? How do we do this? How do we move forward? You know, and we can talk to them about all of the pitfalls of this program. We can talk to them about the history of First Nation policing and how it's kind of changed. And I know the words that I'm saying, some people might feel like, oh, it sounds pretty bleak. It has been at times, and it's been very difficult. And being in the position that I'm in, it's not always easy. You know, it's kind of a thankless position, but that's not why I do it, and I know that's definitely not why my counterparts in other communities do it. It's because we believe in something. We believe that the safety and security of our communities is paramount. And I've said this in a number of different venues, whether it's here or before the government. Without First Nation policing, Canada has no national security. So it's time, it's paramount that First Nation police services are recognized as an essential service. You know, that puts us in a much better position. And one of the things that's happened recently, or not so recently now, I mean, the pandemic has stalled many things. In December of 2020, the Prime Minister came out and said, he announced that there was going to be a proposal of legislation, as it says on this slide, that he's going to recognize essential services as, or First Nation policing as an essential service, sorry. So here we are in 2022, you know, and we're halfway through this year, and we still don't know where we're going. We've had talks, there's been lots of discussions. It feels like we're dancing around the topic, and we really need to get moving on things because First Nation communities deserve it. It's important, and without safety and security, how can we have all of the other things that are so important to us? Now,
thank you very much, Dwayne. Very passionate, as usual, like it. Okay, so our final panelist, because I've been told that Chief Keith Blaine from the Tsuut'ina Nation Police Service is not with us today, sadly, but we're happy to announce our last panelist. Oh, no, sorry, you're Chief Blake. You're Chief Blake. I'm sorry. So Chief Swamp, from the president of the First Nation Chiefs of Police Association, is not with us, but we're happy to have with us Chief Keith Blake from the Tsuut'ina Nation Police Service. The floor is now yours. Thank you.
I was looking for my chief to wonder if I still have a job, but apparently I do. So. Darana Stara, Siza Keith Blakata, Guyamaha Tuskana. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keith Blake, as was said. I am the Chief of Police of the Tsuut'ina Nation Police Service, or as they call us, Tuskana, the black soldiers, the protectors of the tribe. I'm also proud to represent 36 self-administered First Nation police services across this country. And when you're looking at First Nation policing, you really have to recognize it's only because of the passion of people like Chief Zachary and the people that work for us that we are still in existence, because quite frankly, there's inequities, discriminatory practices that are unfair and unjust. But when we're looking at the engagement sessions that we've been recently involved in, and I want to thank our regional chiefs, TG and Picard, for your leadership in this movement forward with legislation. I also want to thank the leaders in this room supporting First Nation policing, and specifically the leaders in my community. Thank you so much for the efforts you put towards public safety in our communities. The engagement sessions really sparked the understanding as an association we needed to put forward a position paper to give clear indication what was needed in our community and moving forward. And we did that in partnership with the Indigenous Police of Chiefs in Ontario, as well as Quebec, and of course our association. And we also went to our communities. We thought it was important to receive that input as well. And what we wanted to do was put forward a position paper that spoke to the designation of essential services in First Nation policing. This co-development project is so important to our communities and so important to our officers and staff. You can read this paper. It's just newly minted. It's been out for just over a week now. It's available on our FNCPA website, and we've also provided copies to the AFN. Within the position paper, we chose to look at specific areas that we felt needed to be reviewed. First, the definition, supporting what definition essential services means. And of course, everyone has an opinion on what that means, but it was important to distill it into the important aspects of that. Reforming the First Nation policing program by ensuring that we are no longer part of a program, the Grants and Contributions program, and that instead we are entrenched in a secure place of essential services. And quite frankly, that's something our communities have known for years. One of the things that was spoken to by Regional Chief Picard, as well as our ADM Morin, was about predictable, sustainable, long-term, equitable funding. That's key to being an essential service. Stressing that our services also required equal treatment in legislation, that we weren't treated differently than other mainstream police services across this country. We are not satisfied with anything less. This is all we're asking for, is equality. And as Dwayne had said, our communities deserve this. Our officers and staff deserve this. The final aspect that we also wanted to speak to was the fact, as Dwayne had said, we are subject matter experts when it comes to First Nation policing, and we want to support other communities have an interest in establishing their own self-administered services or regionalization models with existing self-administered. We want to support communities and show them the path. Another area that's been spoken to many, many times is looking at equity in employment practices and employment standards for our staff. We want to see our staff and officers treated in the same way and protected in the same way as other police officers across this country. When we're looking at our commissions and our boards, we want to ensure that our services aren't restricted in how we spend our money. Our oversight understands truly, as does our leadership within our communities, what we need to protect our borders, what we need to ensure public safety. And any restrictions that said otherwise must be eliminated. We felt another imperative structure towards this legislation was providing our communities with a voice and input. And it's truly important that that is done within each of our communities. And it's also important any new communities wanting into the self-administered policing program are provided that same opportunity. When we're looking at the policy that's in existence today, that needs to be revisited. It's a well over 30-year-old document, and although it prescribes equity, it prescribes comparable funding and specific and important aspects and adaptation to the communities we serve. In actuality, what we have is the terms of conditions of 2017, which imposes discriminatory restrictions on our services and therefore into our communities. As an essential service, it is imperative and absolutely required that these restrictive and discriminatory failings are eliminated. One of the key factors and what I don't need to tell anyone in this room is there have been countless commissions, inquiries, studies, and research which clearly outlines the path to change systemic issues and discriminatory practices that our communities and our First Nations have experienced. And in all those documents, there has always been clearly defined practices that need to change. The great news is they've actually provided a roadmap on how to change and deal with that. And the solutions are there. They're provided within the inquiries and in the reports. And it's also important to highlight that the federal government, in most instances, have agreed with those calls to action, those calls to justice. And we want to ensure that this co-developed legislation includes those action points that are so needed and necessary. In our position paper, we've highlighted and requested our funding partners support our community and our services by acknowledging and moving towards this action. What we've done within the paper, and I hope you do have a chance to read it, is when you're looking at all of the information that's available and has been for a number of years, we've done that by looking at the commitments that are required, the calls to actions and calls to justice. We've highlighted the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples of 1996, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in 2007, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of 2015, and of course the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry of 2019. And I think it was Regional Chief Picard that stated the 5.4 recommendation, call to justice, and how this needs to change immediately, and it calls on all governments to do that in this co-development. And we again fully support that call for justice. In closing, our membership of the FNCPA are encouraged with the co-development and the support we've received from our federal government funding partners and the AFN in moving forward. And we also believe that the FNCPA should be included in all and any discussions related to essential services and moving this legislation forward. We recognize the urgency and the importance of moving this legislation forward in a respectful way, but it's time for us to change. Again, I want to thank everyone, all the delegates here today, and appreciate the opportunity to talk about this important topic. See you, Gus.
Thank you very much, Keith. Excellent presentation, panelists. Thank you so much. And I'm looking at Regional Chief Picard if he has final words very quickly, and this will close this plenary session. So to you, Regional Chief Picard.
Merci beaucoup, Mira. Thank you very much, Chair. First off, I would like to thank National Chief and my colleagues from the Executive for the ongoing support, and especially Regional Chief Teegee for believing in this very important file. I want to thank as well on your behalf Keith Blake and Dwayne Zachary for their input and their expertise and knowledge. Chris Morin as well for the ongoing relationship with Public Safety Canada. And I think the issue here is really if our own policing services are being called to apply the same laws and provide the same safety and security to our peoples, why should they provide it at a lower cost? And I think it's very key here that we make that case before Canada. And I had a very brief chat with Minister Mendicino going back a couple of weeks, and the Minister has committed to meeting with our task force team, which includes, as I said earlier, chiefs from across the country, our own experts, and our own policing services and expertise. So I think that meeting is very key in making that demonstration. And of course, as we have heard from Dwayne Zachary earlier, I think we have to, at some point, deliver sooner than later. And I think that's going to be the challenge, and that message has been conveyed to the minister loud and clear. And I think the minister is really committed. It's a matter of time, and when can we do this? When can we make this happen? So I think again, the support from the Assembly will be key. I think, and there's no doubt in my mind that the support is there. I think we all have the same, certainly, conviction that this needs to happen for the benefit and well-being and security of our peoples. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Kimigwich. Thank you. Okay, so now I just want to address something. First, thank you so much for your understanding. I'm mostly talking to the chiefs that wanted to go to the microphone to address and ask questions. I thank you so much for your comprehension, because I know that this time would have been appreciated, but I'm sure that if you have questions for the panelists or Regional Chief Picard, they're here, so I'm sure they will be more than happy to talk with you. So they're there. Up to you. This said, I want to address another thing. We notice, co-chairs, that there is something maybe that can be confusing on the online agenda version. So we just want to make sure that we're all on the same page here, because draft resolution number 4 and draft resolution number 5, the numbers have been reversed. This doesn't affect at all our process, and we dealt with the draft resolution number 4, the real one, and we'll deal with draft resolution number 5 right after. But I just wanted you to know that draft resolution title is about AFN governance gaps. Okay, and we already approve or pass draft resolution number 4. It is okay. There is maybe a typo in regards to numbers on the online version, but so that maybe explain your confusion if you had one. So thank you once again for your comprehension on that too. And just want to make sure that we're also all on the same page for what we have before us until the end of the day, which is pretty soon. We'll deal with the draft resolution number 5 with Cedric right after, and then we'll have, depending on the time, but we'll have another plenary session, and you maybe heard that as a UN plenary session, but the title is AFN British Columbia, AFN British Columbia Regional Chief Terry TG update, and it's on the UN Declaration Action Plan. So we will need people, panelists on that, ready to go after we deal with the draft resolution number 5. And if we have time, we'll deal with other matters, but I think we'll just keep it short here. And on that, please welcome my co-chair, Cedric. Thank you so much for still being here. I know it's a long day.
So now we move on to draft resolution number 5. So if I could have that posted onto the screens, please. The draft resolution is in your package and is named Addressing AFN Governance Gaps, moved by Chairperson Kilsalem, who I see we have here at the microphone, and seconded by Chief Bruce Archibald from Taigwa-Tagamu Nation. Is Chief Bruce Archibald in the room? Looking to see if Bruce Archibald Chief of Tagamu First Nation is here. Okay. If we do not have Chief Bruce Archibald in the room, then we can open up to the floor to see if another chief or proxy would like to move the resolution. I see. If you can please open microphone 2 so that the chief may identify himself. Could we open microphone 2, please?
Chief Andrew Victor, Chan First Nation.
Andrew
Victor.
Victor. Thank you, Chief Andrew Victor, for seconding the motion, or the resolution, draft resolution number 5, addressing AFN governance gaps. We will read the therefore be it resolved into the record, and then we will give 5 minutes to our mover and 3 minutes to our seconder. So, for draft resolution number 5, addressing AFN governance gaps, therefore be it resolved that the Chiefs in Assembly 1. Direct the Assembly of First Nations, in parentheses AFN, and the AFN Executive Committee to take all steps necessary and implement effective immediately the following definition of quorum for all current and future Chiefs committees, which can be amended from time to time in a policy or resolution passed by the Chiefs in Assembly. A. 50% plus 1 of the total number of members officially appointed to a Chiefs Committee. 2. Direct the AFN's Chief Committee on Charter Renewal to lead a governance review of the AFN. 3. Direct the AFN to provide technical support and seek funding to support the Chiefs Committee on Charter Renewal in undertaking the governance review. 4. Define the following for the governance review. A. Purpose. Seek input and feedback on the effectiveness and performance of the AFN's governance structures in achieving the purpose of the AFN. B. Objectives. Subpoint 1. Seek input and feedback from the AFN Executive Committee members, AFN staff, AFN's Chiefs Committee's member, Advisory Council members, and any First Nations interested in providing feedback. Subpoint II. Collect feedback on what is working well and what is not working well in AFN governance structures to achieve the AFN's purpose. Subpoint III. Report on findings of the feedback and recommend potential charter, bylaw, or policy changes needed to address the governance review findings. Subpoint IV. Process. The process will, I imagine that's supposed to be used, will use digital and paper surveys, a series of focus group meetings to collect feedback, a final written report, and a verbal report to the First Nations in Assembly. V. Report and planning. Charter Renewal Chiefs Committee will collect data, analyze the results, and provide a detailed report for the First Nations members of the AFN and provide a verbal report at an assembly within 180 calendar days of the passing of this resolution. The committee will prepare recommendations for the Chiefs in Assembly on the next steps for addressing feedback in the governance review report. And that is all of the therefore be it resolved. So I will open discussion and offer first opportunity to our mover, Kilsalem. Please open microphone 1.
And if it's possible to put the first line of the resolution from the be it resolved on some of the screens, just so that I can reference it. If
we can have the TBIRs posted onto the screens, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. This is a resolution that I'm bringing forward as the chairperson for the Squamish Nation, but also in the context of a really important challenge that we have at the AFN. I am a member of the Charter Renewal Chiefs Committee. I'm a representative for BC, also working with Chief Harvey Macleod, who's the alternate for BC on this important work. Over the last year and a half, I've been to, and I had to go back and double check, I think it could be 4, but I know it was definitely 3 meetings where we sat there for about 30 minutes and then 40 minutes and then 45 minutes because we couldn't get quorum to actually have the Chiefs Committee meeting. And everybody was trying to text members of the committee, trying to get to see where they were. There was emails asking if people could meet, but we couldn't even establish quorum. And so the staff, I want to thank the staff, acknowledge the staff who have been helping this committee because they were doing the best that they can with what they had from the AFN. but we weren't able to meet. And there's a number of issues that the Charter Renewal Committee has been asked to look at, including things like the Confederacy, a number of other issues with regard to the executive, even our processes here in the Assembly to strengthen them, make them stronger, make them more effective. But for the last year and a bit, we haven't actually been able to even meet to discuss and come up with recommendations, and it's been incredibly challenging. So I went to my technical advisors from the BCFN, who I want to acknowledge and thank, and learned that this is a systemic problem across many Chiefs committees about being unable to meet quorum. And the reason that it's a problem is, I don't even know how many Chiefs committees there are, because I think there's quite a few, is across the board, there's different definitions of quorum. Some committees say this, some committees say that. I also, in talking to chiefs from other regions, learned that it's really challenging for some regions to appoint people because there's so many chiefs committees. And there's a chiefs committee for so many topics that some regions don't feel the need to appoint anybody because those topics aren't issues in those regions. So if you're from a province and fisheries might not be the same level of priority or concern as it might be in other regions, you might not be able to appoint anybody. And then I'm going to use Yukon as an example just because it's a bit different than BC. If there's over 40 chiefs committees, but your region only has a couple dozen First Nations, you can't even appoint, you don't have enough chiefs or councillors to appoint to all the various chiefs committees. So there's serious challenges there. My hope is, with this resolution passing, to create clear, consistent, fair policy in the interim until we can really get to some of the more important work like a policy handbook or a governance policy or whatever else that the chiefs can approve or consider down the road. But right now, in order to clear this logjam, the chiefs committees need to be able to meet and to be able to do its work. And the number one on there proposes a standard definition across the board that I think would open and enable the work to proceed, which is right now the definition for a number of committees is 50% plus one of the total positions available. That means one position for each region. But the Chiefs Committee on Charter Renewal only, as far as I understand right now, only has 7 appointees, or maybe 6, 7, thank you. That means that quorum is 6 people and we have 7 people appointed to the committee. So everybody needs to be there. So this is the challenge. So the change, 50% plus one of the total members officially appointed to a Chiefs Committee. So if there's 7 appointed, quorum is 4. If there's 10 appointed, quorum is 6. If there's 3 appointed, it's 2. But it's up to the regions to appoint. But we can't be held back when some regions aren't able to appoint people to Chiefs Committees. We need to be able to move forward. I have 45 seconds to talk about the rest of the resolution. All I'll say is we spent a long time yesterday, and I spoke quite forcefully and passionately about the need to fix the AFN. And there's a lot of really good work that was happening at the Chiefs Committee on Charter Renewal, and we were really working towards coming forward in a good way with all the options to consider and really let the chiefs decide and discuss and deliberate. And so number 2, 3, and 4, it just furthers that work. It gives a little clarity to the ability for the Chiefs Committee on Charter Renewal to just review, just to check in with First Nations. And the resolution's written in a way to be very simple so that it can be effective. What's working? What's not working? And then allow the committee to come forward with recommendations, and they're just recommendations for the First Nations and Assembly to consider. And maybe we can find a way to address some of the long-standing problems that we have been facing in this organization from probably before I was born, unfortunately. But it really just comes down to, I want the Assembly of First Nations to be the most effective advocacy organization in the world. And I believe we can be. I want the leaders in Ottawa to be afraid of us.
Let's finish up.
Thank you. And to work with us as effective as we can. And I think that this work can happen, and let's do the work. Let's get together, let's put our best minds forward. And I think that this resolution, if it has the support of the Assembly, will open up the opportunity for us to do that work. And I really humbly ask that we consider supporting this to be really effective.
Thank you, Chairperson Kilsalem. I will now move towards our seconder, Chief Andrew Victor. If you have opening comments to make, you have 3 minutes. Chief Victor is signaling that he doesn't. So I will open the discussion to the floor, as well as to our Zoom participants, see if anyone has any points to make. I will do a second call if anyone has comments. We have a member on microphone 1. Please open microphone 1.
Good afternoon, Chief Randy Urbanskin, Urbanskin Cree Nation. We've been talking about trying to get the rights holders, maybe just a suggestion to the mover and seconder to not just a quorum of chiefs, but I think include treaties 1 to 11, so you have at least the rights holders present when there's this decision making.
Thank you for that comment. I imagine that's a statement that you wanted to be put on the record for review. I see you nodding. Thank you for that. Look towards microphone 2, and we can return to microphone 1.
Miigwech, good afternoon, Assembly, and Miigwech, Chairperson Kilsalem, and I am the Ontario rep on the Charter Renewal Committee, and it's been an honor to be there, but like Chairperson was mentioning, it is a challenge to maintain quorum and be productive and meet some of the expectation of the Assembly. I'm really looking forward to the work that's on the horizon in this committee, but in particular, I do want to make mention that, as was evident in the last while, we do need to provide some thought in regards to the Confederacy as well. So I think this is probably the forum that would be best suited for that, to provide some of that thought. So I just wanted to concur and support the resolution.
For the record, can you state your name and community?
Chief Dean Sayers, Batchewana First Nation.
Thank you, Chief Sayers. I will look towards the Assembly, see if anyone else would wish to address. There's a call for question, and seeing no one at the microphones, we will now go towards the vote. At first, I will look to see if we have consensus and ask, does anyone oppose Resolution DR5 addressing AFN governance gaps? I am looking to see if anyone opposes or if we have consensus. Regina. If we could open microphone 2.
Chief Urbanskin raised the issue if it could include treaties 1 to 11, because many of those resolutions impact our inherent in our treaty rights, and nobody answered. So is it going to be in there?
Thank you, Chief Crowchild. The way that Chief Urbanskin, I looked at him, he said it was a suggestion to the different work that would be done and not an amendment as specified. So we had opened the vote, and we're looking towards to see if we have consensus with regards. Is anyone opposed to draft resolution number 5? Chief Crowchild, number 2.
If we're not included, then, what good is it? We're not going to be included. So again, the Assembly will be dealing, or the committee will be dealing with things that impact our inherent rights. So it doesn't make sense. So if it's not included, I can't vote for it.
So you are opposed?
I oppose.
Perfect. So we do not have consensus. We will now be going on to a vote. So I would ask that the vote be opened on the Zoom. Those who are in opposition, please raise your lanyards. I'll look towards distribution. You can lower your lanyards. I will now look to see if anyone wishes to abstain from the vote on draft resolution 5 addressing AFN governance gaps. Please raise your lanyards. Seeing none, I will now ask for chiefs who are for the adoption of draft resolution number 5, addressing AFN governance gaps, to raise their lanyards. We will give the time to our distribution team, and for those on Zoom, just to remember, you have to choose for, against, abstain, and click the submit button for your answer to be registered. After we finish the vote. So we will get the official numbers to you, but as is clearly evident, this resolution is adopted. Draft resolution number 5, addressing AFN governance gaps, is adopted.
Okay, thank you. And for this important comment that we heard related to treaties, National Chief Archibald will address that particular issue. So please welcome National Chief to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Weena. There are many things that we must do at the AFN to make right the situation we find ourselves in. And the structure of the AFN also must recognize the strong treaty contingent who wish to move forward based upon their treaties. And I wanted to assure you, Regina, as well as other nations, particularly in Alberta. I know I'll be meeting with Treaty 6 at some point. But I want you to know that there is a path forward toward this evolutionary change that is needed in this organization. And I want to assure you that our moment has arrived. The moment for change has arrived. And this meeting was that moment. And, you know, one of my other favorite quotes, I always have favorite quotes, is one by Victor Hugo, who said, "Nothing, no force on the planet can stop an idea whose time has come. Not all the armies on the planet can stop an idea whose time has come." And this change that we need at the AFN is an idea whose time has come. And a year ago, when I was elected, that was the first action that this organization and the chiefs took to say the idea has come for women to assume leadership roles at every level, including the AFN. And so, as we move forward, the other ideas of change, evolutionary, positive transformation, have started. And they began here yesterday. And they began with an idea that has been at the heart of the AFN, but somehow not ever exercised. And that is you, chiefs. That you are going to assert yourselves in this organization. You are going to drive the agenda. You have asked for change, and you will get it. Miigwech.
Thank you, National Chief, for these comments and precisions. Always important to know the details sometimes. Thank you. Okay, so here we are at our UN session, United Nations session, and we will firstly hear Regional Chief TG for approximately approx 10 minutes, and then we'll have Caleb Ben, AFN Director's Rights. He will give a 10 minutes presentation on the National Technical Summary, and Caleb will be online, so on Zoom. So first, please welcome Regional Chief TG for his update and review of UN plan. Okay, thank you. To you.
Merci. Denisa, Sekuza, Skyza. I just want to acknowledge the Territory Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and they gave me 10 minutes, and I'm starting my timer right now, and I'll try to get through this as quickly as I can. I do hold the portfolios of now. I previously held the portfolio of economic development. National Chief has that portfolio now. I was switched over to the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples portfolio, Indigenous Skills and Employment and Training, and along with Jocelyn Picard, who gave a report out, I don't have to report on that one, is Justice and Policing, as well as Fisheries, along with Regional Chief Bedard, and also on Cannabis. And I used to hold a portfolio on gaming, and now that is Regional Chief Bobby Cameron. First, I'll start off with ISETs, the Indigenous Skills and Employment and Training Strategy. Certainly, COVID-19 had a detrimental effect on employment skills and training. We appreciate the increase in funding from the federal government as we come out of the pandemic. There was more funding for ISETs, and certainly that helps the current situation. However, it still seems to be a problem in terms of the long-term funding that can continue to increase as our populations increase and as the cost of living increase. I certainly know at training societies and many Indigenous training institutes or what have you that seeks training for our people, the cost for training and learning and education has increased, so certainly that is much appreciated. Chiefs Committee on Human Resource Development continues to be guided by Resolution 25/2018. Next steps on a distinct First Nations labor market strategy is mandated to provided to leadership on human resource development matters. These are ongoing priorities on the Chiefs Committee on Human Resource Development, including determining the impact of increase of cost of living, which I mentioned, on the inflation, COVID-19 pandemic, education attendance and graduation rates, costs of conducting business in a changing economy, and the cost of training delivery. In early 2022, a subtechnical working group on human resource development worked on providing input and employment social development Canada's performance measurement strategy. Key areas of concern include service delivery to urban populations. Much of Indigenous populations live in urban centres, approximately 75 to 80%. So that certainly is a priority. Justice and policing. My colleague Jocelyn talked to you about the changing policy to essential services, going from program funding to essential services. In terms of restorative justice, we do have a resolution coming up, Resolution 17-2022, establishing a Chiefs Committee on Justice. So since I took this portfolio, myself and Jocelyn have been advocating a Chiefs Committee on Justice. Funny enough, we're just talking about committees. So I think it's really important on this matter because, quite simply, there's an opportunity right now with Minister Lametti's office. Matter of fact, by lobbying these many years, we actually do have funding and resources to establish a Chiefs Committee on Justice. So certainly we know the high rates of our people are in jail. we're overrepresented once again, and certainly we need to do something about that. And this is really related to many of our youth, and many of our youth in care. That is direct connection to the jails in this country, certainly overpopulated. In accordance with Resolution 062020, support and advocacy on systemic racism in Canada, AFN has been advocating for a First Nations component to the federal government's Indigenous Justice Strategy. So part of the Chiefs Committee's job is to create an Indigenous Justice Strategy, and that's what we need. And quite simply, once we get this going, we need to populate this committee and start working on Indigenous Justice Strategy, because it's an opportunity. We've done some of that work here in British Columbia as a BC First Nations Justice Strategy that was endorsed by the First Nations Leadership Council, the BCFN, Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and First Nations Summit, who have been working with the BC First Nations Justice Council. We do have a strategy here in British Columbia, and that is really related to the work that needs to happen nationally. So I'll leave that there. Fisheries, West Coast, and certainly we did have a plenary session, dialogue session with fisheries. There's going to be more discussion on fisheries, but certainly here in British Columbia, there has been some funding put towards habitat restoration, and certainly some of those projects need to be resourced. Far too often, the government eats up a lot of that money within their own department. So here in British Columbia, we need more of those resources to reestablish the habitat and reinvigorate those populations of fish here in British Columbia. More importantly, work that we're doing in policy-wise that affects fisheries here in the West Coast as well as on the East Coast. Much of that work continues on. Cannabis. On the cannabis file, we have seen a great deal of progress here in British Columbia. We have many different arrangements, but certainly many different arrangements in cannabis throughout the country, whether you do it on your own, create your own laws, start establishing your own rules, or you could go through with the provincial government, because there are 10 different types of laws that affect cannabis in your respective province. Here in British Columbia, you have Section 119 agreements. And really, it's those agreements that allow us to be a part of the cannabis economy, whether it be for recreational use, and there are other arrangements for medicinal uses. So certainly, I think it's important to understand that I think it's one of those evolving things here in terms of what kind of arrangement you want in terms of cannabis. So nevertheless, I think the priority areas includes advancing the recognition of First Nations inherent jurisdiction over cannabis, advancing First Nations taxation and revenue sharing jurisdiction, supporting First Nations cannabis businesses and entrepreneurs through economic development and advocacy work, prioritizing community safety, a real health and safety issue, advancing the development of infrastructure, institutions, and other resources here in British Columbia First Nations that need to succeed in cannabis market provincially, nationally, and internationally. I do have, in terms of the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, I did give an update in our dialogue sessions of what we're doing here in British Columbia as we implement Bill C-41, the provincial legislation, Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. We've been working for that 2 years, 5 months, and right now we just finished off an action plan that was endorsed by the First Nations and the provincial government at the beginning of April. 89 commitments, 5 years, very similar to what we're going to start doing here, as I am the portfolio holder for UNDRIP on this ad hoc committee that doesn't require chiefs. I certainly hope that there's more interest, and I know there's 5 appointments out of the 11 regions that have been appointed to this ad hoc committee. I have my 2 appointments, Cheryl Casimir, Cookie Judy Wilson, and also some technical help from Merle Alexander, and certainly that's going to expand. Here in British Columbia, we also, in terms of implementing C41, there's a commitment to a secretariat to make sure that all these laws here in British Columbia are followed. We're really taking on some of the initiative here and the lessons learned. A report came out just last month about the current state of affairs on the one-year anniversary on UNDRIP here in Canada, very similar to what we've seen in British Columbia. A thin document, not much substance, but yet the work needs to carry on. I got 23 seconds, 22 seconds. I do have Caleb here online to help and support me in this work. Much of the portfolios I do hold, I'm excited to continue on the work that needs to be done. If you do have any questions, I'll be here tomorrow, and you'll get a hold of me if you have questions, and also Caleb, and I'm done. I just got it.
Thank you.
Whoa.
Sorry, thank you. I saw Caleb, and so he's muted, I think. So thank you, Regional Chief. And please, if you can put Caleb Ben on the screen and unmute him. We see him in double screen. We still can't hear you. Hello, hello, no?
Justice Chief Kane is saying that I can be heard online.
You're here now, Caleb, so the floor is now yours. You have approx 10 minutes to go, I think, I've been told. Thank you. You can go, thank you.
So I can't tell if the PowerPoint's up, but actually we just go back for a second. I just want to say something very briefly. The top 7% of the lawyers in British Columbia and most jurisdictions are designated as Queen's Counsel. And the reason Merle isn't here today, Merle Alexander, is that he receives his Queen's Counsel designation today, in the next couple hours, actually. So I just wanted maybe if those in attendance could join me in congratulating him, even though he's not here. He was supposed to do a bunch of this legal work, but he is being recognized for his work for our people as one of the top lawyers in the province and the country. So I wanted to acknowledge that, and with that, I will pivot to the presentation. Right, so well. All right. Okay, so my name is Caleb Bain. I'm actually Dan Daniza. I'm coming to you from the unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory, Mussey Choke, Salem for the welcome, and I can't see if the cousins from Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh are here, but thank you for hosting us. Mussey Choke, Regional Chief TG, my portfolio holder, for the welcome as well. I'm from the Western Edge of Treaty 8, and I am now entering day 6 in this hotel room, not 2 blocks away from you. But c'est la vie. This is a bioethical responsibility. I'm the Director of Rights at the AFN. This sector leads AFN work related to the UN Declaration implementation. I was formerly Legal Policy Advisor to former National Chief Bellegarde. I was a participant in the process that led to Bill C-15, and before that I was a Special Advisor on Water to the Assembly of First Nations. I had the honor of working with now National Chief Archibald, and she was the lead on water. So I've had very privileged experiences at the AFN. If you go to the next slide, please. I'll begin with the National Action Plan. My purpose is twofold. One, to give you an update on the current state of play on the UNDA, which is a shorthand I'll use, and the National Action Plan in particular, and also update the chiefs, the First Nations and Assembly on recent developments that we're seeing since the Royal Assent of last year. So with that, next slide, please. What you see before you is Canada's timeline, and you'll note that we have, the slides are not online. Chief Rob McGinnis from Rainy River.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
That's very haunting. Okay. Chief Rainey, can you see? I can't tell, sorry, I'll leave that to go. Anyways, in the interest of time, okay, I'm seeing that he can't see. I'll continue and try to do my best to summarize vertically. In essence, we have less than 1 year before Section 6. There's 3 operative sections in this law. Section 5 is consistency of Canada's laws with the UN Declaration. Section 6 is the National Action Plan, which has to be finalized by June 21st, 2023. And Section 7 is the annual report, the first of which was just delivered a couple weeks ago, as Regional Chief TG mentioned. At this point, the first progress report indicated to us fairly severe process issues. I would encourage the chiefs to, if you're interested, to ask Minister Lametti about those issues tomorrow. These issues also, I think, were part of what spawned the 3 resolutions on the UN Declaration Act that are going to go before the floor, I'd rather tomorrow. The core point here is that the window of advocacy and opportunity for the leadership, for the rights holders to participate will rapidly close. And the implication deriving therefrom, and this is what myself and Regional Chief TG as well in the dialogue session said, in light of a very tight timeline, chances are we're going to have to focus on implementation activities, accountability activities, and those sorts of things. As you look into phase 2, the second annual report, and finally in June 2023, the tabling of this National Action Plan. We have less than a year to do the National Action Plan. And that means significant implications and consequences therefrom. Next slide, please. So what this describes is sort of the resources that went out in the phase 1 processes. Our understanding is that 23.6 from budget 2021 went out to First Nations. Apparently they added a bit more money to that. It would have been around 30 million total that DOJ and the Government of Canada contributed to First Nations. The thing is that program, one, it was massively oversubscribed. There was over 200 applications, and the requests for the resources, because it was a relatively small pot, was at least 4 to 5 times what was required. So it's useful that the monies went out, but we have some significant challenges and lessons learned. First of all, it clearly articulates there's an unmet need. The only verifiable number we have to indicate how much this work is going to cost is the experience of the BC First Nations, but the challenge is that the BC First Nations process, specific as it is to the province, is distinct from what has to happen for all the nations across the country, all 634, plus the representative organizations, plus other entities. So if you do the numbers, there was over 200 applications totaling approximately $98 million. That indicates to us that something like $500,000 per nation across this country would be a baseline need. And that will be something we have to consider. Next slide, please. Budget 2022, as you'll see bolded and amplified there on the screen, includes more resources. Although one thing to know is that budget 2021 was 2 years of funding over 2 years. This is over 5. So whilst it looks like a larger pot, it's actually divided out longer. 68.5 is for UN implementation. There's 11 ongoing to justice, which indicates that the government is going to fund the structure inside the DOJ, which created one new secretariat and modified a second secretariat inside the Department of Justice to interface with the leadership, with the nations as they come back and say, this is what the National Action Plan has to have. This is what we think the priorities should be. This is the kind of priorities. So for example, policing as an essential service. There has to be a structure inside DOJ to hear that and include that and write that into Canada's plan. And I should emphasize, and this came out in the dialogue session previously, this is Canada's National Action Plan. This is not our plan. It's a plan for them, made by them in their house. And that's good, but there are other plans that should be considered. Another interesting point, there was 9.5 to the Department of National Defense. For reconciliation and even declaration-related activities, which we're still researching. That's a very peculiar ask. Next slide, please. What you see now is prioritization of Indigenous voices and the tabling of the annual report. And we'll just go to the next slide really quickly, because in that annual report, next slide, please. Hello.
Next slide, please. Okay.
Voila. Okay, well, this is fine. I'll go with the key developments, but just to wrap up that last bullet, what we're seeing, if you guys look at the annual report, and I encourage you all the materials, all the documents for the dialogue session are on, I think, USB keys, and they're also accessible online. And that includes a copy of that annual report. And what we saw in the annual report was a structure that prioritized Indigenous voices to participate in the National Action Plan, but there's reference to the provinces and territories having a role. There's references to industry having a role, and there's references to civil society organizations having a role in the development of the National Action Plan. And as Regional Chief TG has said very prominently, and many others, nothing about us without us. You know, whilst this is Canada's National Action Plan and they can choose to talk to whom they want, obviously there should be First Nations led across the board. This should be led by us, for us. And so the presence of those discussions with the provinces and territories, for example, brings to the fore some very difficult questions, because not all jurisdictions have legislation like British Columbia, for example. So we have to consider the next issues. What I'll do from here forward is articulate 3 key developments that we've seen in the last year, but a couple general points. First of all 3 examples illustrate that these are long-standing pre-existing issues that are now kind of getting addressed in the contemporary period. Secondly, there's a tension because even if the issues are long-standing and the outcome is generally favorable and in the interests of First Nations, the process to get to that outcome also has to be consistent with the UN Declaration, right? Things have changed. As National Chief mentioned in her comments yesterday and today, I think Chief Kelly mentioned as well, could be Casimir mentioned it, like things have changed. And so even if the government is taking steps in a positive way to address longstanding problems, if they do so in a manner inconsistent with the UN Declaration, that right there, prima facie, is a problem. The game has changed, and it's not a game, actually, to be quite frank. And the final issue is that, and if you do the next slide, I'll just describe it, that part of the things that we're dealing with are time delineated. The National Action Plan has to be done. It's legislatively defined. But the other 2, which are the alignment of Canada's laws with the UN Declaration and the annual reporting process, those are perpetual processes. And so the first, and this is sort of the first key development, the feds are looking to create a universal non-derogation clause relative to First Nations. There's, as you see here, at least 24 federal laws have NDCs, a bunch of different agreements, particularly the modern treaties have these. And so there's a potential amendment to the Federal Interpretation Act to add this clause. The issue here, and this is National Chief Archibald indicated this to Mr. Lametti back in February of this year, so some time ago, that whatever that process is, and to be clear, there are nations on both sides of this issue. There are some nations that are very much in favor of a universal non-derogation clause, and some nations that take a very different position, both on the basis of the clause themselves and also on the basis of just process. They don't want unilateral imposition, whether or not it's well-intentioned. And National Chief Archibald pointed out very clearly to Mr. Lametti that whatever process this is, it has to be bound in FPIC, it has to be well-resourced, and it has to be done pursuant to the duty to consult and accommodate. So you'll see a dialogue session handout reference at the bottom of this slide. There's an AFN discussion paper on this issue for your review and consideration. And as well, this was only published about 2 weeks ago, but the DOJ published a What We Heard report related to their quote-unquote engagements. And just to be clear, we expect this modification, the first application of Section 5 of the UNDA, to occur sometime probably in October of the coming year.
Caleb, sorry,
Yep.
your time is up, but if you can please just conclude,
Yeah, I'll just wrap up real quick.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, 2 more bullets. So next slide, please. Secondly, the DOJ has created interim guidance, which is meant to guide the federal family while they apply this law and consider the laws. If you look at the bottom slide, this interim guidance, once it's complete, should be read parallel to the other principles the feds have developed. They're very useful advocacy documents, and this will be shared with the leadership as soon as they're complete. We don't have the copies yet, but once DOJ is done developing it, we'll look at it. The key point here is that this is interim guidance. This is not guidance created by us, for us. So I'd encourage nations to think about how they want Canada's laws and policies to be considered relative to the UN Declaration. Next slide, please, to wrap up. And this is the most interesting one. IS is modifying the Indian Act. This came out ostensibly because of COVID, but there's indications that it has an earlier history. They're modifying the Indian referendum regulations and the First Nations election regulations. I won't go into all the issues except to say that we've been advised that this is not occurring under Section 5 of the UN Declaration Act, which is quite surprising. Of all the laws in Canada that should attract the scrutiny of the UN Declaration, one would think the Indian Act in particular would have to be considered, but apparently this is happening under a different process. So again, there's dialogue session handouts. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Articulating like where this process is, you'll see we're kind of at bullet 3, so early to mid 2022. There's going to be more engagement on this. So with the next slide, I will say apologies for holding you away from the gala. I'm sure it will be lovely. Thank you for taking the time. Please contact me and my team if there's anything at all that we can do to clarify further, if we can support you in any of the work that you do. Masicho.
Thank you very much, Caleb. And now I know that I didn't mention his presence because I didn't know, but at first Merle Alexander, lawyer for BC AFN, was supposed to be with us, but he's not, he had to left. But we are so lucky to have the presence of someone else, so he's here, and we'll invite him for a 10 minutes approx presentation for a legal summary. So please join me inviting Derek Odgers. Thank you, lawyer Derek Odgers, to you.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss the potential for the United Nations Declaration Act National Action Plan. So my name is Derek Odgers. I'm a lawyer. I'm external legal counsel to the BC Assembly of First Nations. And I'm honored to be joining you here today from the unceded traditional and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I'd like to just thank the presenters before me, Regional Chief Terry Teegee and Caleb, for the important overview that they provided. So as you know, the Declaration Act was implemented in BC in 2019. So the Declaration Act and the Alignment of Laws process has provided an important opportunity to have shared decision-making powers reflected in provincial legislation, and has strengthened government-to-government relationships as a result. So as the United Nations Declaration Act action plan is being created, there are some lessons that can be learned from the process of the Declaration Act action plan. So some wisdoms to be gained, and also acknowledging that there were some growing pains in that process. I'm relatively new to the work, but I've had some experience behind the scenes. So this is a new process, and with the Declaration Act and its action plan being the first piece of law of its kind in the country. So with the Declaration Act and the UN Declaration Act, there are provisions within both that sort of mirror each other. So both acts require that the minister implement an action plan, and there are other requirements like reporting on the development of the alignment of laws process. So with the Declaration Act action plan and the development of it, it was important that the provincial government captured in that initial document priorities as identified by First Nations. So, but there were some primary problems with it initially that are important to observe. There was a lack of, in some instances, there was a lack of concrete actions that were identified, and timelines within the document were a bit vague as well, leaving people concerned. However, the addition of the 5-year timeline was important as a goal to measure goals against actions. So just noting that vague language committed to reconciliation isn't enough, and to many it feels like lip service. So people want to see what priority actions the federal government will be taking on each of the points that are put into the action plan. And we have heard the need for reconciliation rather than reconciliation more than once. So as identified with the UN Declaration Action Plan, it's going to be important that rights holders and IGBs are able to identify priority areas for change within that action plan. And as region-specific interests will vary, it's going to be important that each region is going to be able to have their priorities included in that national action plan, and these region-specific interests can be identified based on engagements, which will hopefully be undergone soon. So an engagement also needs to be undergone considering the immense pressures that First Nations communities are under currently and recently. So throughout the adoption of the Declaration Act and its action plan, First Nations communities in BC have resiliently faced a global pandemic, climate-caused emergencies, and the tragic discoveries of the 215 children. So through these tragic and historic occurrences, engagement work is still being undergone on the implementation of the provincial action plan, which is stretching capacity and resources of communities to the maximum extent possible. So an addition in BC and the addition of the national engagement process will create new capacity and resource strains that need to be accounted for by the federal government. This is necessary to ensure that First Nations participation in the creation and implementation of the UN Declaration Action Plan are considered. So as mentioned, the FNLC in BC is currently engaged in the alignment of laws process and are working with the provincial government on this. We're involved at a number of legislative alignment tables working on legislation from areas including emergency management to children and families and forestry, just to name a few. The FNLC has also been involved in the development of initiatives that will help reform litigation practices in BC, noting the release of BC's civil litigation directives as some of the work that we've done. So the work on the alignment of laws process is brand new. And it's a process that the province, I think, and First Nations organizations are learning from daily. It's not expected to be perfect, and sometimes that means stepping away from the table and coming back with a refreshed mindset. That said, it's fair to say that some of the frustrations that have been experienced on the BC side will probably be experienced at the federal level as well. So these lessons learned can be useful. There can be useful collaboration and cooperation between us. Noting there have been instances where it does not appear that ministries are all on the same page in regards to the UN Declaration. So while change is happening, and you can't expect that all ministries, I guess, will have adapted to understanding the UN Declaration at the same pace, they need to. And First Nations engaging with the federal government will likely face early and hopefully not ongoing frustrations in their collaborations with federal partners. The smoothest work that can happen is an aligned approach across ministries, creating a predictable ministerial approach. So if the ministry is going to go through the legislative alignment process, they should develop a comprehensive analysis of how the UN Declaration is going to apply to their statutes. This will allow First Nations who are participating in engagement to note where gaps in legislation currently are, and helps identify areas where shared decision-making with rights holders could take place. And in addition, if there are any other documents that could be relevant or might be necessary to aid in these processes, the federal government and their ministries should pay attention to those documents, because First Nations that they're engaging with will be asking about them. And they should ensure that they're undergoing evaluations of their legislation to note alignment with these documents. So I'd also like to note there have been some really positive developments. So BC has implemented the new Declaration Act Secretariat, as has been mentioned throughout this meeting, I'm sure, and staffed by ADM Jessica Wood. So the Secretariat helps advise ministries on ensuring that the alignment of laws processes are cohesive with the UN Declaration and that their engagement work is not confusing and ineffective. Noted as well that the federal government has said that they've also created a UN Declaration Act Secretariat. So the experiences of the Declaration Act Secretariat will definitely lend to that, experiences at that level as well. So it's necessary to ensure that that UN Declaration Act Secretariat is well staffed because they're going to be undergoing a pretty huge process engaging with First Nations across the country. So they have to ensure that any concerns about capacity don't prevent a stumbling block to discussions and negotiations. So as Caleb mentioned, there are some early priorities with the UN Declaration Act Action Plan implementation. So it was mentioned in the annual report that the federal government had published that they had been conducting some work on a non-derogation clause in the Federal Interpretation Act. As Caleb had said, this will need to be reviewed by First Nations, Indigenous governing bodies, and representative organizations to ensure that the work is being conducted adequately. As well, that same report did mention that the federal government has been devising internal policies to advise ministries about the UN Declaration. It's important that these documents are shared when they're completed to ensure that First Nations are aware of internal policies that are guiding early decision-making. And where possible, this early guidance should be co-developed by Indigenous partners to ensure that these internal policies are appropriate to the work that needs to be done and will not that these internal policies won't represent a stumbling block between the parties. So this work is exciting, and there are many critical pieces of legislation that can be transformed using the UN Declaration at a federal level. The creation of the National Action Plan will be challenging given constraints that some communities are facing right now, and the compressed timelines offer an additional challenge. So we're hoping that we can carry forward a lot of the work that we've done at the BC level and take these lessons learned through our Declaration Act Action Plan implementation and legislative alignment process and take that to the national level to great effect. So thank you for your time, and yeah, I appreciate the time to speak. Thanks.
Well, and to Derek Ogers for your message. So now we will be going towards closing comments. Before I do, I just want to put for the record the official results of draft resolution number 5, addressing AFN governance gaps. So I will remind you that quorum was 106 and that you need 60% of people who voted to vote for a resolution for it to pass. The numbers that we have are 131 for, 5 opposed, and 2 abstentions, meaning we had a 96% of people who voted for, so the resolution is officially adopted. It is now time to close day 2 of the Assembly. You do have the gala happening tonight, hosted by the BC AFN and the host committee. That is taking place at the JW Marriott Park, which according to Regional Chief Terry Tiji is near the casino. It is there from 6 to 9, so you have a half hour to get pretty, and see you there. We will reconvene tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Pacific time. Thank you, and have a great night, everyone.